After a 40-year drought, the Golden State Warriors brought home the NBA championship this week, and the co-owner who helped turn them around into winners telling me how to turn D.C. into a winning team for us.
You have to hold the right of punishment, of execution, of firing. You have to hold that right. It doesn't mean you do it. It's not a threatening right, but they have to know, the people in the organization have to know, if you're not going to fit into the plan, you're going to be out.
Sabrina, wouldn't government workers perform better if they had a real fear of being fired if they don't perform?
Absolutely. Look, David, I don't think government should or can ever operate as efficiently or effectively as the private sector, and we don't want them to. But I do think as a taxpayer, I have an interest in eliminating waste and bad workers and redundancy. And so, of course, if there's a threat of not having your job next year because you're not being productive, then absolutely I think that we could streamline government.
Bill, shouldn't it be easier to fire government workers?
I wish I had a civil service reform plan that would allow Peter Goober to get rid of a couple of clunkers, but wouldn't allow...
How about a couple?
Okay, a couple 100,000 clunkers, but wouldn't allow every administration to empty out the executive office building when there's a change of administration. I think that's called the spoil system, and we'd put in a lot of work to get rid of it.
All right, well, John, what about that point? We don't want to go back to the spoil system that would allow each new regime, if you will, to get their own clunkers in, their own people in.
Oh, I'd almost prefer that because they wouldn't be as effective at stealing the money. But I'm really more with Sabrina on this. I don't want government to be effective. I want it to be dysfunctional. If it were effective, that they would spend more of our money. But we know that's never going to happen because, let's face it, government doesn't labor under market discipline. What we're talking about is Neverland.
Okay, John has a conspiracy of his own. He wants dysfunctional government so you can get rid of it.
Well, I think this actually goes to John's point. Look, Goober and his partners put in their capital, right? And he's been a successful investor in sports for years. They buy this team for $450 million. It's now worth $1.3 billion. He had incentive to make it successful, right, which the government does not.
Rich, is there any way to get incentives into government?
Well, the problem is with the word performance, because in the private sector, it means building a great product, building market share, making a lot of money. But in government, it can mean good things, but it also can mean perverse things. For example, are you performing if you're shutting down some poor, small community bank because they violated some narrow ruling in Dodd-Frank, which was meant for big banks?
Well, Steve, we have a couple of folks from the private sector going to be running for president, Carly Fiorina among them. They're going to try to apply private sector tactics to government management. Is there any chance that could work?
Long-term, no. As long as you have politics in government, which is inevitable, defining performance is going to eventually be political. The EPA, for example, is very efficient at putting out regulations that are destroying the coal industry in much of America. Is that the kind of efficiency you want? The best kind of government is a smaller government doing a handful of things, leave the rest to the private sector.
Okay, so Sabrina, back to you. I understand we're all for smaller government, I think, here, but the fact is that there are some people in the private sector who think the government should operate more like the private sector. Is that just a pipe dream?
I think, unfortunately, I think it is, because there simply isn't a bottom line. Or even at an organization like mine, which is a nonprofit, I have a responsibility to my donors to say we're good stewards of your resources. But government doesn't have that. They don't have to respond to taxpayers as much as I might want them to. So I'm sure that there are a few ways that we can affect things on the margins, but I just don't think that we can take, what worked at a large corporation and implement it in Washington.
Remember, nobody was fired at the IRS for all their mess ups. So people still hold on to their jobs in government. Coming up, forget the ties and socks. Get our Informer's Happy Father's Day stocks.